All right, let's give Dr. Mishra one round of applause. Thank you.
So I can see that Franco has, awoken a lot of us, so which is good because sitting there in the entire day is not an easy job and it can be tough. And the brief I had from Ms. Noraline that, by the time I come here, so 2/3 of the day would have been gone. So you need to make your impression in the first 5 seconds. So she needed someone who was handsome on the stage. So here I am. Okay, so very quickly, this is a slightly tough subject on innovation, and I'm going to give you a perspective of a practitioner. And as Scott mentioned, there is no standard route to innovate. There are different ways, different methods, different things that you can do. How do we do at Accenture? That's a very important element I want to discuss, because if some of you know what Accenture does, and I know people have different versions, because sometimes I ride Uber and they ask me where I work. I tell them it's Accenture. The response is, oh, it's a call center. And we are not a call center. So if many of you know that Accenture has no call center business in Philippines, and it's one of the only outsourcing companies which is actually not in the calling business. So just to clarify that. So how do you innovate when you are working with businesses and you are actually, supporting them on not the entire value chain, but parts of the value chain, which can be differently configured, right? And that's tricky. Because, okay, if you're running an airline business, you have an end-to-end value chain, you know what all to do and where to innovate. But how does Accenture figure out exactly where the bang for the buck lies? And sometimes it is not necessarily what we do for our clients here within our premises. It could actually extend beyond, right? So that's an element which I wanted to bring to you about. Here's an interesting case study. It's about a utilities client, and I think all of us have got different experiences of utilities. Most of us receive, electricity bills and have to run to pay them in the 4 days of grace period time before it gets disconnected. So we have our own customer experience, good or bad, right? So interesting, because if you look at the utilities industry, it's one of the oldest industry across the globe, serving customers. There's a lot of entrenched model in it, in how power gets generated, how it gets distributed. Usually less or no competition until recently. So you had a Meralco who would cover all of Manila, and therefore you don't have any other option but to go to the Meralco office in case you have missed a payment. Bad customer experience, right? So there are a lot of things happening. And we have seen various industries transform, and I think some of you have been witness to what has happened to the telecom industry, right? Many of us would not even have home phones. We are all on mobiles. So when customers have options, they very quickly move to where they get maximum value for the money they are paying, right? So in a similar context, we are witnessing an industry which is now facing a lot of regulation, which means you are having regulators come in. They are talking about what should be the experience that your customers should get out of the services you provide, right? In some cases where there are consumer forums, they end up paying a lot of penalty if the services are deficient. So industry is in a churn. And here's an interesting case study which I thought would be relevant for this group. And briefly what we do for them. So we got this business. It's one of the Australia's largest utilities business. And if you know the Australian market, it's kind of a slightly insulated market from this industry perspective. So the players are dominant players. This particular utilities company is both a producer of electricity and some of the other energy products, as well as a retail supplier. However, the way it works in that market is if you are a retail supplier, then you cannot be a producer for that region. And if you are a producer, you cannot be a retail supplier. So the regulation is changing and they're questioning, the monopoly of some of these businesses. What we do for them, interestingly, we look at the entire value chain of what could be the energy products. So essentially, right from the time we enroll a customer, get them into new contracts and the renewals, all of it we handle. We set up the customer, we set up the billing cycle, we set up individual plans, and finally we end up doing collections and then collect the cash, right? Which is, when I say collect the cash, it's cash posting to the systems. The collections happens on the remote side. This industry is facing a lot of challenges, and the challenges essentially, if you look at it, all the barriers that existed, and some of you can relate to it, right? If tomorrow we have 10 different energy suppliers in the Manila market, what will happen? The barriers will break. Everybody wants to acquire customers. The price of holding to your customers go lower and lower. And you are in a situation where you have invested a lot of your capex or your money, right? And then you're facing a situation where you may not end up making enough money if you don't look at how you're delivering value to your customers, right? So when these guys came to us, mind you, Australia is a very conservative market from outsourcing perspective. So they do not like much to outsource, and one of the most comfortable regions they are willing to outsource is actually Philippines, which is the first baby step that the industry has taken. So when they came to us, they were facing a complete disruption in their, utility space, and they didn't know how to handle. And I think the outsourcing happened because it instantly gave a first level of cost advantage or leverage, but that probably would not be enough to sustain in this industry. So a lot of things are changing. If I look at, customer behaviors are changing. They are younger people. Today, nobody wants to go and pay a bill. We all do it through our mobile phones. Even if there's a dispute, we want to handle through convergence technologies. So the industry is dramatically changing. And therefore, it was important that a utilities client which has been in a legacy environment looks at how it is doing business with its existing clients. Right? Mind you, I think the two key goals that these guys had one was their customer satisfaction. So if you actually look at their NPS story, I mean, it's a shame to even talk about those numbers. It's extremely negative. And if I look at it, the hope that customers would retain with them was extremely low. And second biggest goal that they had was how can we, change the entire business model so that we are cost efficient and we are able to be competitive to the new entrants in the market space. So that was very critical because new entrants came with new technologies, cheaper, lesser capex, better understanding of their customer service, all that stuff, right? So these are some of the stuff, and well, there's a lot of exercise that has gone behind this. But if I look at the innovation themes, essentially, prima facie, to change the entire market, we looked at how can we give them a head start on, costs that they are incurring on driving their businesses. That was very critical. Second was, what's happening to customers? What do customers feel? And why are they rating this utilities client negatively? In fact, extremely negatively, right? So we wanted to look at it. We also want to look at, what's, the change in the overall energy market. I mean, we all have situations where our demand changes. For example, if I'm going out to be in the US for the next 2 months, I don't want my electricity company to be charging me bills for the period I have no consumption. So can I have flexible plans? Can I have things which actually ensures that I get charged for what I consume, not just because it's a utilities entitlement for a company which is providing me services, right? So these are some of the stuff we kind of mapped out with a lot of discussion with people who were running this business. When this business came to us, and I'll just, there won't be any numbers on the screen, so I can share you some of the stuff. Like, we had about 1,000 people who were part of the business out of 2 geographies, one here in Philippines, the other piece being in India. And obviously the client got a lot of advantage, cost advantage of working with us. But at Accenture, one of the things that Accenture does, and this is a very conscious thing that we do, is we need to destroy the source of revenue for Accenture. And that's the only way to create value for clients, right? So if we have a revenue of 1,000 people working with us from our clients, how do we ensure that in the next 1 year or 2 year span, this is not the revenue that we're generating from the clients, not from the 1,000 people business that we are running for them. It should be something else, right? So there's a conscious attempt to destroy the entire value chain. And that's why, one of the fundamental beliefs that this company has, that there is no future for outsourcing, right? Because when you say outsourcing, the only thing you mean is cost advantage, right? So if I do this business at a certain cost for 1,000 people for this company, what stops another outsourcer to come and say, I will do this 1,000 people business for 20% less? Right? That's how the market operates. So you need to ensure that you destroy the source of your revenue so that you move up the value chain and create revenues which are much more valuable to your clients, right? So that's an important element of it. And let me show you some of the things that we did. And it's very brief presentation, so I won't take too much time. I hope I'm on time, right? Okay. So some of the things that we did, when this business came to us, we realized that, there are a lot of areas which, if we kind of take it head on, we can give immediate benefit to clients. And Accenture has actually a lot of capabilities around some core areas like artificial intelligence, automation, etc. But really, those are not the innovation itself. So let me be very clear about it. Those are actually enablers to how you do the big innovation for a company, right? So if I look at the first example, the manual processes, everything that was repeatable, had objective decision making, was completely taken over by bots. And the efficiency we drove for this company in the first 7 months was about 22%. And that's a big jump, right? You normally don't drive those kind of efficiencies instantly when you get into a business. It takes you about 1.5 to 2 years to get into that kind of efficiency or more, right? So, second big thing was, we were doing transactions, but really didn't know where the issue lied. So, where as a manager would you take decisions, right? Do you know exactly if a billing cycle has been missed for a client? Because if you know that, then you know that my company is not getting revenue for it for someone who is consuming the utilities, right? So that is an insight which you need to know live, not as a report back in time, looking at data for the last 3 years and saying, oh, these many customers have not paid. This data has to go live, which means as you progress day to day, you should know exactly what has happened, how much has got missed, right? And why have we missed those billing? Do we know how many contracts are actually going to expire because, our competition is sitting at the doors, and probably you have a customer who's giving you extremely negative rating for your service and is going to move out, right? They're just waiting for the contract to expire. Do we know? And do we know in real time? Do we know today? Can we take action? Can we talk to those customers? So the first thing that we needed to do is to push up all these metrics live, which means I need to know where is my decision making as of now. I don't want to work with data which is 2 years, 3 years old. It's irrelevant. Those are reports for top management for things that have gone wrong. Right? So I've been already shown the 5 minutes time, so I'll try and be fast. Right? So significant areas that you can look at. Third, I think one key element was disruption. Interestingly, when I looked at the end-to-end value at the work we had with them, it occurred to me that there was no reason for 50% of the business, which means 50% of the people who are working with us, to actually exist. So we are talking about straight away from 1,000 reduction to 500. Why would we do that? Because that's actually revenue loss for Accenture, right? But that's exactly what we do. We looked at their escalation management process and figured out that half of the volumes in that process are irrelevant, should not have occurred in the first place. And the client had simply outsourced to us because they thought this was a lot of trash job and some third world country people would do it. That was the mindset, right? We went ahead and had a discussion with the client that a lot of these things that we are doing in this process can be fixed upstream, and therefore we don't need to have 50% of the workforce upfront, right? So that's dramatic change. Third big thing is operating model. From the time I acquire my customers or I have got them enrolled to the time I raised my bill. So right from the contract, signed to the time when the customers pay you, there is a significant time elapsed. And in between that time, you've got huge amount of money, which is thousands of customers all over who have to pay for the services that they have consumed, but for some reason and some inefficiency, they haven't paid you. Right? If I look at this entire model, for this client, we were looking at about close to 650 million working capital locked, which means a capex-intensive company, even if you tackle 10% of this working capital, imagine the amount of cash the company would have to go for its expansion plan, right? That's disruption. So we are saying we need to re-look at how fast you can get customers to start paying you for the services rendered without actually getting into area of disputes, etc. Right? So that's one of the disruptions in the value chain. Finally, how do you interact with the customers? Because, a lot of feedback and a lot of NPS surveys told us that customers are extremely unhappy, which means if I had an issue, how do I kind of solve it? Obviously, today the technology has moved fast ahead, and we can look at simple things like self-serve, mobile applications, even things like I have certain number of appliances in my home. Do I know what is my consumption pattern? Can I forecast on my phone what will be my bill by the end of this month cycle? Right? So it gives a lot of control to your customers. Agree? And it kind of takes away the disputes because customers dispute. They don't know what they are consuming, and finally when it hits them, it's a big bill which has hit them. And that bill will run into dispute. You lost another 2 months, 3 months resolving the dispute. And sometimes regulators will come into play, and you will have to pay fines to the regulators. Right? So So there's an entire gamut of innovation end to end. The entire goal that we want to have is the reason why this 1,000 people business is with Accenture. 2 years down the line, we want to give it back to the client and say, hey, we no longer need 1,000 people. This business can be run by 100 people flat. Right? Behind this is a lot of capabilities with SIT. While the story sounds simple, there is a capability of artificial intelligence which is getting in. There's a capability of automation which is getting in. There's a capability about, a distributed workforce which is getting in, right? So you're no longer working in a FT-based model. You actually, depending on the volume peaks and troughs, you can have different staffing and all that stuff. A lot of these capabilities are getting in. These are all disruptive technologies which are helping us enable to completely change the way the business model operates. And remember, we have touched the cost side of the model here. There are various other sides to touch as well. So with that, since I'm kind of out of my time allotted to me, so with that, I just wanted to kind of, summarize for you that the world is changing. And we are not here in the business to kind of work as, doing it cheaper for our clients or US counterparts company, which are much more expensive to do the same business. We are actually here in the business to transform the way the utilities business run, right? And the mindset has to be that what is your source of revenue 5 years, 10 years down the line? Do you want to do the same repeatable stuff? The answer is no. Yeah? So with that, I want to kind of wrap up my discussion, and I think we open up to questions.
All right, let's give Dr. Mishra a big hand. Scott, can you join me up on the stage here, please? So Dr. Mishra will take some questions now. So maybe we can all sit down here. Who would like to go first? Any? All right, maybe Scott, you can make some comments about the presentation of Dr. Mishra.
Yeah, so I would start by making 2 observations. I think the comment that the world is changing, if you were to say a few years ago, we're at an innovation conference, what industry will be highlighted, you probably wouldn't expect an energy utility company, right? But there are no safe havens in the world anymore. Innovation is pervasive. Disruption is affecting every industry in the world. And everybody needs to think about the things that you heard about before. The second thing that really struck me is, in many cases, the use of systems to bring transparency. So as a consumer, you know how much you're spending, you know how your systems are working. And it reminds me of one of the best stories that I think exists in an organization that went through a pretty big change. This goes back a little bit more than 10 years ago. Alan Mulally becomes the CEO of Ford. And this is before the global financial crisis. But he encounters a company that is in crisis. The company doesn't have a good strategy. It's not operating well, et cetera. And one of the things that Mulally, trained engineer, spent time at Boeing, among other places, did is started to institute weekly management meetings where dashboard, red, yellow, blue, green, for all the different things that they're working on. So he has this meeting, and at the meeting, everything is green. He's surrounded by green. Everything's going great. And Ford had just lost something like $30 billion. So he says, either we were intending to lose $30 billion, or you're not telling me the truth. And the punchline to the story was, he said, you can't manage a secret. And this is true whether you're running an electrical utility, whether you're turning around Ford, or you're looking at a portfolio of innovation efforts. If you don't have good, robust, real-time information, if you're not having honest discussions about what's good and bad about ideas, you're never going to make any progress. And the ability for this electrical utility to have transparency through systems in many places, I think, enabled a lot of the change that we heard about here. So those were at least a couple of reflections I had. It's a cool story.
Any comments to what Scott just said?
No, yeah, so I don't think I have anything to add to what Scott said, but when you're looking at innovation, I think a lot of us feel the tangible product innovations or a new startup or a business model kind of innovation for a service that you're offering. But I just want you to think hard, because if you look at what's happening in the space of unicorns, right? An Uber is providing the same taxi service. What has it disrupted? Right? It has disrupted the entire business model and the customer experience. Right? So when you think of innovations, innovations can mean multiple things. And in many cases, for large organizations which have embedded, a big capex stack, means undoing the stuff that we have been doing in the past. Right?
All right. Anybody who has any questions now? No? Yes, there's somebody there. Please approach the nearest mic. State your name and company, please.
Yeah. Hello, I'm John Garcia from Homeship Management. I have a question, Dr. Mishra. How do you relate, because you're a Six Sigma practitioner, and how do you relate Six Sigma to innovation? Is there a clear distinction where you should go ahead with innovation prior to the Six Sigma methodology?
All right, so I knew my Six Sigma would be held against me, but okay, good question. So I think I also spoke about it, and I just want to say a very simple thing, let's make it a little uncomplicated. We should not be stuck about Six Sigma. We should not be stuck about robotics, artificial intelligence, etc. Nothing, right? These are only some methods and tools available to you, right? What Six Sigma helps me is it actually helps me to see a problem as I walk. That's the discipline it gives me. That's all, right? What I apply could be a mix of thousands of things that I need to, bring all of them together and run it like a, probably what an orchestra would do, right? So you are bringing various capabilities that exist in organization. Six Sigma could be one, right? So tying too many things to Six Sigma may not help you innovate, because your innovation idea is unique. What you require to take the journey to make that idea real. If it is Six Sigma, fantastic. If not, who could be? Right? So really, I am very methodology agnostic, and that's the way we need to train our mind, because we are chasing an idea. We are not really slave to the methodology that will take us there.